Thanks everybody for being here today. I am trying to do a humongous series on homeland building. I'm basically trying to help you. I'm trying to document some of the things I've done that I never document. I'm horrible about that. And the overall goal is to get a lot more hands-on experience. I'm a SANS instructor and author. I have 61 certifications. I've been in this industry a long time. And yet, a lot of what I've learned came from a lab. So, challenge number one with a lab is what hardware do you use? What are we going to put all of our software and virtualization in? Are we going to do 100% cloud? Technically, that's not even a correct answer because you can't do some of the things like interacting with switches and routers and even some firewall stuff's a little bit different. So I want to mix. We do want some cloud in our lab, but for today, what I want to do is I want to call out hardware recommendations for what you and I can use on a budget, maybe an unlimited budget. I wish. So we'll kind of bounce back and forth between like used hardware, new hardware, and I'll kind of share like what I like to do, what I prefer, and what I've learned over time tends to work a little bit better. I am going to be trying to monitor chat, so if you've got any comments or suggestions, feel free to put them in. I'm going to go down a huge list of things that I've kind of documented that I've learned over time work really well. They are going to be on the notes of the YouTube video, so you can check those out, but let's just kind of talk through them. So, hardware, right? What are we talking? Well, if you look back to the last couple series we've done, we've talked about deploying virtual machines, containers like Docker, Kubernetes, doing more like infrastructure as code, Terraform. We had hypervisors. We talked about things and techniques we might do on like Raspberry Pis. And of course, if we do things like NAC, which is network access control, like we might want to have some routers, switches, wireless access points. Ideally, we want to do like next gen firewalls. We want to have taps. And in order to do all of this, I'm going to need a decent amount of hardware. But I don't want to break the bank. Because for some of you, this is the path of building a lab to get a better job, a promotion. For others, it's a hobby and you love it. But hobbies, when the wallet goes unchecked, can lead to divorce. Oh, my kids can't even afford to go to school, but my home lab is amazing. Don't do that, right? So I want to find this balance. And employers, if you're watching, I hope you're listening too, because you don't have to break the bank to give your employees access to a really high quality lab. Most of what we're doing is software, but I need hardware to run that software on. So I'm going to start with kind of the main bread and butter for our labs, virtual machines, right? Ideally, we're going to run a whole bunch of virtual machines, domain controllers, web servers, DNS, Security Onion, maybe Elastic Stack, Splunk, you name it. But those require hardware, a decent amount. So do you go with a really strong laptop? Or maybe do you switch to a server? And then a lot of what I see is rack mount servers. And then some of you actually have like wall mounted racks, like mini racks. In my basement, I have an actual half rack. And I wish I wouldn't have done it, to be honest. Super cool. And all the people who come over to look at the house, if they ever see it, they're like, wow, Justin, you're cool. And I'm thinking, yeah, but anytime I put rack mount hardware in, it's loud. It's got some high pressure fans. The power consumption's higher. And is it really that big of a deal for me? No, I live in the rural America and it's not that big of a deal, but I've learned over time that there's some things that worked a little bit faster. So I'm just going to kind of walk through one of the main things I do for myself as well as my employees. This is kind of funny, but I'm actually a huge fan of, and it doesn't have to be HP, it can be Dell, it can be IBM, but let me kind of show you a hardware recommendation that might work really well. If you look for HP Z620, and I'm going to do 16 core, and I'll show you why I do this in a second. Now notice this one's $1,000. This one's only 600, and if I keep looking, I can probably get this around 500. But look at this. This is actually two processors, 8 core apiece, so it's 16 core in total. 96 gig of RAM, and hard drive you're probably going to swap out for something anyway, but 1 terabyte plus SSD would be really good. This box right here is actually what I'm live streaming on right now. I've ended up ordering 7 or 8 of these. Now, my lab is not 7 to 8 of these, by the way. The reason I've ordered so many of these is we bought them like a single one for a lab, and we realized that it worked so well that we ended up getting 2 more. But then we realized how much faster they were than the hardware we're on. So we got rid of our hardware. When I say our, my company's, like my laptop, my business partner's laptop, now some of my employees. In fact, I think all of my employees, which is another 4, are using these. Because I bought like a $2,300 laptop. Like it was like a 6 core, had a 2080 NVIDIA card in it with a Max-Q and uh, say 64 gig of RAM. But this thing left it in the dust, even though it's a really old model. Like benchmarking, I've had 52 virtual machines running on this at the same time that my little girl was playing VR games off a PCI graphics card I put in it. And so that's awesome. The benefits of using something like this is it's technically server. Wait, that's a desktop. No, it's actually a server. It's a server and a desktop chassis, which means a couple things. It's quiet. You can't hear it running, and if you hear anything in the background, it's my air conditioning or heat unit. It's lower power consumption, not by a lot, mind you, and it doesn't produce as much heat. Yeah. So yeah, in your lab, 16 core, 16. Yeah, I love these things. So in my lab, what I'm going to show videos on here in the next week or so, I'm going to be doing Hyper-V, Proxmark, and vSphere on 3 of these. And I'm going to capture the install and walk through fine tuning those. But these, I think, are the predominant piece of hardware I would recommend in a lab. I'm not saying everybody needs a desktop. Some of you can't afford this. You have a laptop and that's what you have. I'm not even necessarily saying you have to buy anything. I hope you at least have like 8 gig of RAM on whatever box you're using, and if so, start there. You don't have to buy a whole bunch of things to get going with this home lab concept. The reason I like these kind of units is that, and I'm sure Kevin, you can attest to this as well, is you can leave a whole bunch of things running. For those of you with lower hardware, you're going to be able to do a lot of what we're going to show in these lab videos. But you're going to have to power things off and power them back on, and you're going to basically run at bare minimum, which is fine. But if you have enough money to do something like this, you can leave them running, which can save you hours of time. And time, for me at least, is the most important thing. I can't waste it. So I love these. There are Dell versions of these, like the Precision workstations. There's IBM versions of these, but use servers and a desktop chassis config are my favorite lab hardware. Now, you could also try to buy laptops. So for these, I've got a couple. These are technically brand new. I don't know if I would aim for brand new, but the reason for a laptop, I'm showing something that's brand new instead, is it's multi-purpose. Like it's something you can take to class if you're in college. You can take it with you on the road. Notice this is not a business class unit. MSI, it's a gaming rig. But why this specific model? And it's not about this specific model. It's about this concept. We've got 64 gig of RAM. We've got, I think this one has 6 cores in it. Yep, 6 core. It's an i7, and it's got, how much hard drive space was in this? 2 terabytes. Plus, this is a halfway decent graphics card, which means you can do things like password cracking, play video games. Hey, I'm not judging. I do it. Any StarCraft 2 fans out there? Whew. Co-op mode? I'm sorry, I like it. That's how I relax. So what I found for personal use as well as business is these home grade, even like a Dell Inspiron, especially if you wait around like Thanksgiving, Black Friday, end of year, you can usually get on chat and ask for even more discounts. But you're gonna have a multi-function device, and yes, this is it's 1300. For some of you, that's really expensive, but this should last you probably 4 years plus. This might be something for some of you who are younger and going to school, or older and going to school. If your family's trying to help you out, this would be a good idea to be like, hey, for my birthday, instead of doing this huge thing, or for Christmas, or maybe meet me in the middle, or could you help me out here, right? By the way, if any of you are so strapped for cash that you don't think you can enter this industry, please reach out to me personally, because I'm not going to promise you anything, but I don't want to leave you in the dust. And I've known some family members of mine that, $100 is a stretch. And it's not that they don't work. Like, I've got a family member that the son is actually paying for the rent, whatever, right? Life situations happen. Maybe you're a single mom, whatever. As a community, I'm pretty sure we can all surround you with a hug, help you out, and get you going. So if that's you, please let us know. We'll take care of you. But multifunction, right? You only need one of these, and you'll be able to run almost everything we talk about in the lab. What these things are not going to help you with, though, is what happens if we start doing virtual LANs? We start doing 802.1x NAC and networking stuff. So the primary devices we really want to try to buy are some type of server or desktop, like that HP Z620, or an all-purpose laptop that you can use personally and for work and for lab. That brings up the discussion of virtualization, but those will be the next videos I do anyway. Yeah, for laptops, you prefer Dell Precision. Use one and add more RAM. Nope, absolutely. 4 slots of SSD because you're hardcore. I actually did, and I still have this one, and I liked it. I still like it, actually. This is a really interesting concept where you buy a bare bone laptop and then you put even like the wireless card, the RAM, like everything in it but CPU and graphics. And I've had that one forever. In fact, that's what I used to teach on when I traveled for SANS. I always called it as my cyber defense weapon because if a student ever attacked me, it was so heavy you just drop it on them and you'd knock them out. But this was like, I want to say 4 years ago, and I had 64 gig of RAM and a desktop processor in it. So yeah, laptops used, bare bones, there's a lot of things we can do here. So, okay. But when it comes to networking, right? And here there's so many options. Let me just kind of call this out. I've got a cheat sheet I'm going down here. And I'm not done. Actually, I'm sorry. Let's go. This is actually another really common method of doing labs. I believe this is what my good friend Ismail Valenzuela is doing. He has NUCs. NUCs are low powered, but they've got some pretty serious hardware in them. Like this has 6 cores that are actually spiked higher in speed. And you can get 32 to 64 gig of RAM in these, a nice NVMe SSD in here, and they have actually pretty good graphics. You could actually play games on these, but they're very low power. So for some of you who live in states that energy is super expensive, they're like this big, super tiny. I mentioned that I'll share even some of the things I thought were a mistake. Well, I had 3 of these originally in my lab. Really, it was like 2 of these, and then I had the Canyon Skull NUC, which looks like, yeah, this, because it's even more for gaming. And they'll run vSphere and Hyper-V, and like it worked as a home lab. But what I found out is even though now you're up to 6 core, there's also an 8 core module, that when you put these up against like the HP Z620s, it's a no contest. This is almost $800 for 6 cores. That other unit I showed you was $600 for 16 cores, and it had triple the amount of RAM. So that's where I'm meaning. Now, over time, I justified it to myself, the power savings, but it just wasn't there. So I really like these, But on like used NUCs are not that cheap. Like they kind of maintain their price. They hold up really well. They travel well. Um, but a lab doesn't really need to do those things. So really cool devices, and I like them. But you can get a lot more hardware for less using like a used laptop or a used desktop model like an HP Z620. So okay, let's go. If you are going to do servers and you want to do new stuff, the Super Micros actually have some high end, well, low cost, fairly decently powered servers. Again, I'm still going to lean towards like an HP Z620, but this model is kind of cool because it'll go up to a tremendous amount of RAM and it has 10 gig NICs in it. Downside is overall processing power is not that great. So, networking, let's switch gears here. Couple things we can do here. I think the cheapest still is used, right? Things like a Cisco 3750, 50, come on. Just show you how cheap it is to get a switch here. Like here's a $10 24 port. If you keep going down this, you'll be able to find things even like 48 ports, and like here's what I'm using at home. $20. $20, right? And so these are switches that were in production environments. Switches, if you ever wondered, like they sell lifetime warranties on these a lot because they don't die. It's like the choo-choo train that just it wouldn't give up. It just keeps going and going and going, right? I've don't think I've been in business environments where switches have died. It's very rare, but I've never had a lab switch die, which is kind of odd because these things have been shipped, they've been beaten around, they've been reloaded and firmware updated, and it's fine. Now, $20 if you don't want your like if you think like your network's got hiccups or is acting odd, that is like the ultimate pit. Like I hate that. I don't like troubleshooting that. It's a great learning experience. For starting off, start with something cheap like a $20 switch. You might want to research and find ones that are quiet again, because some of these can get pretty loud. Just as an example. This is another unit I like to play with. I'm not recommending this. I'm just showing it. This gets quite a bit more expensive, but this is an Arista 7050. These are like enterprise class 10 gig switches, but the Arista models can actually act as tap fabrics, which is basically where you can get packets from one port to another, but even airframes and corruption. These are actually strong enough you can run a virtual machine on the switch. You shouldn't, but you can. You can run Wireshark directly on this 10 gig switch. I like Aristas. I'm a little biased here. $1,200, you don't need this. But if you're goofing off with 10 gig, which you don't need for a lab, these are cool, but they're very loud. So they're also heavy. But again, different thing. I'm just speaking out loud right here. So other things we might want to do though, if you want something that is more consistent and shouldn't break or have weird networking things, I'm not saying the Cisco will, but it can. You can get cheap like this little Netgear device for a whopping 34 bucks. Like it's 8 port, it can do port mirroring, it can do VLANs, it can do a little bit of access control lists actually. Now, whether or not the model is going to work with an enterprise NAC, some of them it probably would, but most of them probably not. You can get these in different sizes. So like if I want to go up in size, you do something like this. I currently use Cisco switches that are used when I'm goofing off with like NAC solutions or dynamic access control lists or fabrics. But then when I'm not doing those things, because most of the time I'm not, I use this currently. This is my current switching here. The reason I did this is in here, I use the two 10 gig ports as my uplinks. I'm actually sitting out in a barn. You can't see it right now, but I've got chickens literally running around outside this window right here. But I have a really long 10 gig line running from my house out to this barn. And so I do that because the excess of traffic over these ports to devices at my house will exceed 1 gig. I don't need it, but I have the money to do it, and I don't like bottlenecks, so I use those two 10 gig ports as uplinks, and then the rest of this I use for my VLANs with my hypervisors, my access points, and I was willing to buy two of these so they work with each other. This is also kind of neat. I like it and I also hate it, but it has this cloud management where I can actually on the fly configure it on my phone. Took me a while to get used to that because you basically want these to be able to use the default VLAN 1 to get an IP address to the internet, which is like it's a non-best practice. And so I was like, I don't allow that. So when I first put this in, like they wouldn't work. It's like, what's going on? And all right, so I had to make an exception so these could cloud call out and then I can control them. But it's kind of neat. You can turn that off though. But so this is what I'm currently using. But there's a lot of options here. Again, Cisco, Arista. There's this MikroTik. These are kind of interesting because these literally can run either a switch firmware or a routing firmware, and they tend to be lower priced even though they're new, but they have tons of capabilities. And these do tend to work with NAC solutions. Like if you look at something like a packet fence and things like that, they'll often show you how to integrate it with a MikroTik. So $138 for 24 ports. You can also get 10 gig. This is kind of interesting. This is a 5 port, but it's 4 of those are 10 gig. Beware, even though this is only $143, those are SFP plus ports. If you're not familiar with that, that requires a more expensive Twinax cable or a adapter with something that goes into it, which is also tends to be more expensive. If you got something that said it's 10 gig, but it supports T Ethernet based ports, a standard Cat6, Cat7 cable will work with it. It's much cheaper, but the unit tends to be more expensive though. So you have to offset that. Is it worth it to host the lab in the cloud? So this is primarily a question around like virtual machines. If it's something you're going to spin up, get working, and then delete, and you're not going to keep it on, it's probably cheaper to do it in the cloud. If it's something you want to leave your lab running, it's by far cheaper to do it on premise. Like as an example, go deploy Security Onion in the cloud, and then wait a month and get that bill. Security Onion's awesome, but I think now what minimum is like 12 gig, might actually be 16 gig. Security Onion hardware requirements. This is something we will have videos on later, by the way. 16 gig now. 4 cores, 16 gig, and 200 gig of storage. I can put that on like an HP Z620 and leave that running forever, and I'll have lots of remaining hardware to use. I deploy that in the cloud. I mean, that's probably going to be $50 a month, maybe. So $600 over the course of a year, which would have bought me that HP Z620. And I'm only running that. I'm not running any of the other stuff I could run. Because remember, I said I've had a single Z620 running like 52 VMs and virtual reality games, and it was able to keep up. But again, if you were just to spin it up, get it working, prove to yourself that you could do that thing, and then delete it, you're probably talking maybe even $1, and then you're done. So that's where the cloud can be super helpful. The other thing I'm going to point out with the cloud is like, let's say you want to play with a Palo Alto, or maybe an advanced solution like an F5. Not that Palo's not advanced, but F5 is really complex. You can test those commercial offerings for usually 7 to 30 days for free, and then delete it when you're done. So you could technically lab it, deploy it, and be done. Again, I don't like doing that because I like to be able to constantly refer back to those solutions. So I'll usually pay for like F5, you can get a lab license. I think it's $100 a year, but you can use it for a year and then renew if you want to have it again. Palo or FortiGate sometimes will have cheaper lab units, or you can buy them used and stuff like that. So depends on what you're doing, but I think that answers your question. Let's keep going in here. For wireless, this is kind of cool. I really like these units. This is not what I'm currently using. It's what I used to use. But Aruba instant access points of any model. The 205s are the ones I have experience with. I know there's newer models, but these are 802.11 AC, so they're actually fast, and they're almost always less than $30, and you can buy multiple of them. So AC, high speed wireless, works with all the NAC solutions and fun wireless integrations. And these are the kind that you can buy, well, as many really as you want, and you just stand them up here, 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 and they'll mesh across all of them. And they tend to be fairly easy to configure. So if you want enterprise wireless, like I get that Nighthawks and some of the other stuff are really good, but they're still not enterprise. This is an enterprise grade. It does all the fancy wireless stuff. In fact, when you get the management, you click advanced, you're just like, I don't even know what half of that even means. And you have to go Google it. So I like these. These are really good. I actually have these running at my parents who live right across the street from me. Well, really on the same property. I'm currently using these. This is what I have at my house, right here. I have 5 of these, which is the max that my firewall will actually support natively. Technically, I can cloud manage these. I tend not to use cloud management. So these support Bluetooth scanning, 802 wireless intrusion prevention, NAC, and all the things. Again, the Aruba really supports most of that. Maybe not the Bluetooth scanning. These are a little bit faster. Well, that's not true. They're a lot faster, and they can reach farther. And I live on 16 and a half acres of land, so I've got these at my house, at this barn that I'm in, and I have a couple barns. So I'm doing this kind of get around my yard, mowing the yard and listening to music or audiobooks. And of course for labbing, of course, right? Keep in mind all this stuff, and this is part of the crux of being in IT is these are tax write-offs. I'm not an accountant or a tax or a lawyer, disclaimer, right? But I buy these, and these are tax write-offs because I am using them to learn my field, my profession. The fact that I also get to use them is a benefit, but I'm initially getting these to learn off of them. So I really like those. And then I tend to pair them personally with a 50E model. This is something I did buy new. Most of the stuff I buy is used, like the access points I bought used. But the firewall I tend to buy new because I keep these around for a long time. This does not include security services, so I'm not getting antivirus signatures, I'm not getting intrusion prevention, I'm not getting any of that feature sets. I usually, when I'm in deep research mode, like I'm writing stuff for my SANS courses, I'll pay for the license for those because I need it for research. When I'm not in research mode, which isn't very often, I'll get something like this without the licenses, like this. So $300 and I'm done because I still can do things like firewall rules and app control and integrate it with Active Directory and do TLS inspection with decrypt mirroring, and it's all natively supported just like you would have in an enterprise environment. What I'm missing or lacking is antivirus signatures and IPS rule updates, and I'm going to get those from a detective standpoint with Security Onion anyway, so I don't tend to care as much. I still actually can integrate some of this anyway. So I really like FortiGate for home firewall. If you don't want to have a firewall because of the cost, something like a pfSense, right? That's software, not hardware. You can run it as a virtual machine. The only downside I've noticed with something like that, and the reason I'm a little hesitant, in my house, if I were to run a pfSense on that HP Z620 or any hardware I have, I'm still actually introducing a little bit of latency, and it actually impacts my download speeds, especially if I'm turning on antivirus and IPS and all the other things, proxy, because you're doing it in software without hardware accelerators. It's nothing with pfSense actually. If you were to buy pfSense on one of their hardware boxes, you wouldn't have that problem. Firewalls have special chipsets, think of it that way, or hardware built in microprocessors that are optimized for certain tasks like SSL inspection, antivirus signatures. And so if you don't want the internet speed you have to be affected, you kind of want them to be hardware based. So that's why I won't go back to a software based firewall. I do use pfSense and I do have it and we will cover it, but it's more for like a virtual LAN of virtual machine traffic that's funneling through it, not my direct internet traffic that I'm doing routinely. So research purposes, which fits a lab perfectly, but my direct internet goes straight out through currently this. You can get it with wireless built in, so you don't have to buy an access point. And again, if you prefer Checkpoint, Palo Alto, SonicWall, I'm not judging. I don't care. And a lot of those companies, like Palo used to have where you could get online and look for when they're doing a bus training thing. And if you would go and sit for an hour in that training about Palo Alto where they showcase their products, they would give you a free dev small like PA200 unit. That's amazingly awesome. So FortiGate, I know Palo does that. You could check with some of them and just ask. Some of them I feel like if you just ask and be like, "Hey, I'm just a small fry. I'm just learning your product, but could you help me out or do you sell like a lab version of this or if I write a blog for you, would you give me a unit?" You'd be shocked. Sometimes I just hear you go, "Yeah, sure, go for it. Write me a blog, showcase why you like this." So, okay, we've got those. Let's go to some of the weird side of the fence here. Let's go here. For those of you who have an even smaller budget or not, doesn't matter. What about something like this? Ah! I'm sorry, I love Raspberry Pis. I have a weird obsession with these things. Um, these are that's about the actual size of the box. Super low power, and this is $100, but to be honest, this is giving you 4 gig and 4 CPU cores. And currently, what I use a lot of the 8 gig model, which is a little bit more expensive, $120, but I get 8 gig of RAM and again 4 CPU cores. It's not an x86 or AMD 64 style chipset, meaning I can't run like VMware Workstation or Fusion or like it's ARM. It's a different chipset. You can't install certain software on them, but you can run a lot of stuff on this. In fact, Docker Kubernetes works on Raspberry Pis. So a lot of the stuff we're going to cover, I'm probably going to do it in like a virtual machine. You can do it directly off Raspberry Pi, and they're actually fast. Like if you get the version 4 model, it's actually pretty good speed. Like the initial OS install, because of your SD card, one of these things, this is actually the piece that slows it down the most. And so notice here I'm optimizing and buying one that's 170 meg write or 90 meg write, 170 meg read. This you want to pay for a pro model, not the other ones, because the speed of the hard drive ends up being your bottleneck. But if I were to take and buy a few of these kits, right, I could create a Kubernetes cluster with pods of containers, a Docker swarm with a whole bunch of Docker services, and if you don't know what any of that is, this is a cheap and effective way to do it. That if you all you had was a laptop, go for it. So you can run Nagios, so network monitoring solutions on these. There's actually native images that directly do it, like Nagios Enterprise. You can run Zeek, Suricata, which are network monitoring solutions. You can't put Security Onion on these, but you could effectively emulate the standalone pieces, which is actually the more important case. Zeek, Suricata. You can get Nginx, Apache, all sorts of web services on these, and again, they're actually fairly quick. So like to me, especially if you had like nieces, nephews, or children, and you're trying to get them into some of this and seeing if they like it, these are amazing. Plus, you can do other stuff like emulate IoT devices. You can technically turn these into arcade systems more as like a hobby. And for kids, that might actually be what you try to do. Try to get the old Super Nintendo and PlayStation and Game Boy Advance games to work on this. Be careful of legalities and teach them of ethics. Like you're technically only supposed to do that for games you own. But that's a fantastic learning experience. These can be file servers. You can do domain controller emulation with Samba and a lot of stuff. So I like these. And if you really want to go for fun, this is slower than molasses, but it's still cool. I have a lot of these. That board is, I think, $12. And just because I'm a stickler, I get it with a heatsink, a power cord, and a case. That's $25 for a, I think it's 1 gigahertz by a half a gig of RAM, if I remember correctly. Let's see here. It doesn't say it on here. I'm pretty sure it's 1 giga. It's just a single core 1 gigahertz, but a half gig of RAM. But you could still run Apache and Nagios, and this is even cheaper. It does take a long time to get even with a fast SD card because it's not a very fast board. But to me, this is single board computing at its like its finest. You just need a standard USB thing to power this on, and off to the races you go. Now, keep going with some of these edge use cases. I've also been playing with quite a bit with these type of devices. So this is a Jetson Nano. It's $90, and it looks like it's just another like Raspberry Pi based device. This is more for those of you who are interested in the data science aspects of cybersecurity. Because while this is kind of still a Raspberry Pi like device, this only uses 5 watts of power. And let's see, I think I've got it's 4 gig of RAM, 4 cores, just like a Raspberry Pi 4. The difference here, though, is this has a 128 core graphics card on embedded into it for $90. This is for playing around with like image processing, and it's more optimized for like Google Tesseract and things like that. But it's for data science playing around with. Can I get much farther on a laptop with a graphics card that's NVIDIA and has, what we talked about earlier? Yes. But if you're trying to play with precision and seeing the how much you can process per core and have a box dedicated to that that's really low power, you can't really beat these kind of devices, and you can get them bigger. I'm not recommending this, just kind of showing the opposite side of this. This is $700, but this has 512 GPU cores, which are actually faster cores than the Jetson Nano. 8-core processor, 32 gig of RAM, and it comes with 32 gig of storage, but I'm pretty sure you can give it more than that. Again, just more for more deep playing around with on the data science stance. Again, a laptop with a nicer NVIDIA or especially a desktop with a PCI card will be able to blow this thing out of the water. But I mean, if I look for, say, a NVIDIA 3090 right now, most of these are out of stock. Notice it's not even listing prices. If I go to Newegg, it'll list them. If I go to Newegg and I look for a NVIDIA 3090, which is more of a consumer grade card that'll actually excel at data science. These are about $2,000 a piece, but they have 24 gig of RAM on board and they have tons of GPU cores. So if you're playing around with the data science stuff, you could technically try to get something like that, and then you can do some really awesome gaming. So okay, going back to the like the Jetsons or the Raspberry Pis, biggest thing, just please make sure you buy something that's like an extreme SD card, because it's the speed of the SD card. The size actually doesn't really matter that much. So like this is $10 and 32 gig of RAM for an ARM-based operating system like Ubuntu or Raspberry or any of those. You could probably run a whole bunch of containers on that anyway. I would probably go for a 64 gig model. I tend to do 128s, but to be honest, I never come close to filling it because when you're doing containers, data is not persistent. And even if your images are big, it's only one image. So this tends to work really well. So there's that. Let me see what else I've got in here. I have other laptops and stuff in here, but I'm trying not to just show case too much of that. We've got networking, switches, routers. We had wireless. We had some firewalls in there, laptops, desktops. We had Raspberry Pis. What are other things that you all want to ask questions about or that you found that you really like? What are some other hardware suggestions? Anybody in the crowd got some out there? I don't care if it's desktops, servers, or especially if there's any niche cases. Like technically, like this is kind of cool. If you get this $10 camera, you can actually, and I know this is controversial for a second, but this $10 camera can do facial recognition on a Jetson Nano. I can literally have it where every time I walk in my house versus my wife or my kids or the mail lady, it actually know who it is. I know there's like some issues. Well, I'm not even going to go there, but whether you're for it or not, it's the fact that you can do these so cheap. Oh, monitors. Okay, so for a home lab, to be honest, monitors, you can just get the cheapest things possible. You probably want a 1920 or a 1080p monitor, but I will talk through um, some things that might help with this. For monitors, I usually will get, you know, to be honest, I like these Acer larger ones. I tend to go for 32 inches, but you can get these really cheap. They tend to work really well. But there's a different thing I want to showcase here. If you're goofing off with gaming, you know, well, I don't know if I should go there or not. I'm trying to stick to the core of what the video is here. So for a home lab, I think just things like a used 32-inch monitor, even a 24-inch monitor, because a lot of the stuff we're doing in a lab is going to be you stand it up and install it once, and then the monitor can even be powered off. So really you need something that supports VGA, HDMI, and maybe DisplayPort. But to be honest, all of those are a non-issue because you can get adapters that will convert from one to the other. So like, I wouldn't spend that much money. That's not worth it because you're not looking for high quality here at all. In fact, I would say for budget, just go back to the ones that we just saw. Like this $31 Samsung 24 inch is more than fine for a lab environment. Uh, I don't even care if the screen is chipped. As long as it still powers on and you can vaguely make out what it's doing, you're fine. Now, for students, I would recommend getting a second monitor. Again, it's not about gaming. Here, it's about being able to do two things at once or see two things at once. I'm on a 3 monitor setup, and actually I have a 6 monitor mount. I'm just moving from the house to my office out in the barn, so I haven't yet put the other 3 back up. Now, 6 is overkill, just quite frankly, but 3, I don't like going back to 2. So I would try to get multiple monitors. For students, this is kind of cool, but I really like these, and I always travel, or at least I used to always travel with these when I would go to SANS events. Portable monitor, USB based. And so like this is a 15-inch monitor that is 1080p and it's powered over USB-C. You can get ones that are USB-C and you get ones that are the older USB as well, like the flatter one. And then they almost always come with a carrying case, usually folds over the monitor so that you can throw it in your backpack. And you don't want a huge one, but you don't want a small one either. So usually 15 inch is what I would probably recommend because that'll fit in a 15-inch backpack with your laptop. Some of you who are using laptops that are like, I like my laptop that's a 13-inch, but a 13-inch screen is horrible. It's so small, right? Especially if you got like 4K mode on. In fact, you might want to go back to 1080p. It's not about eyesight. It's just about, holy cow, I mean, really? So a portable monitor for taking with you to college, to SANS events, I'm actually shocked how few people do that. And then if you're at home, it still works. You can play games on them, and they tend to work fine. Some of them, the non-USB-C ones, have a little bit of a lag, so maybe gaming wouldn't work. But that just means you can have like cheat codes or like Netflix playing on the portable monitor, and then your game on your main monitor. So I would definitely recommend that. It's a good investment. If you're playing tournaments like Capture the Flags, having a second monitor is humongous. And these tend to weigh like, I bet this thing's like 1 pound. See if I can find this. Oh, no, 2.8 pounds. I mean, that's not a lot, but it does add up. You can find ones that are lighter weight. So, monitors for lab though, aim for functional but cheap, unless it's for like a student on the go. Then you might do a portable monitor. So there's that. All right, what else am I missing? We could say mice and keyboards, but again, go for the cheapest thing. It doesn't matter. In fact, do a combo pack. Combo keyboard and mouse, just too expensive, $28. You can probably like go for cheap. And again, you can do it used off eBay. It doesn't matter. You can buy it. Here we go, $13. It's Logitech. Logitech's a good brand. Those tend not to matter as much. Let's see here. I'm looking around my room to see what other devices I might have. A whiteboard, I know it's not technically computer hardware, but if you're like me, I would probably recommend a whiteboard of some kind. Technically, I could be like, get an iPad or an Android tablet and annotate on that, but to be honest, there's just something different about physically touching a whiteboard. I like the iPad that I use for that, but if I'm standing with my business partner and we're planning something out, I do a whiteboard. Can we get a suggested list as a spreadsheet or document to build the lab? For hardware, yes. So in this stream, I'm putting all the stuff I'm sharing in the YouTube links, and I can technically compile that into an Excel document as well and just put that link there as well. So I'll go back and add some of the things we talked about that aren't already on my list. But yeah, I can definitely do that. Okay, so we've got servers or the desktop equivalent, laptops. See here, webcam, that's not really lab based. You could do sensors. These are more Raspberry Pi based things. Like, oh, I know what you might want. You might want a USB. This is kind of weird, but you might want a USB Bluetooth. Something cheap like this. The reason for that is even if you have a desktop or a server and you plug it in, you can actually take a USB device and pass it through to a virtual machine. And by doing that, you can actually do things like Bluetooth scanning. To be honest, I think that's more of a Hack5 type device. Like, Hack5 shop. There we go. Forgot that it's .org. Not the Pineapple, even though those are really cool. But if you were to do something like this Ubertooth or the Hack RF, they're out of stock right now. But if you get a Bluetooth chipset that's USB based, you can do Bluetooth scanning. Okay, some chipsets won't let you do this, so you might want to get the right one. Ubertooth 1 is one of them. I'm also a fan of the wireless. Oh my goodness! Somebody help me. What's the cheap circle base with the antenna wireless device that everybody recommends? I'm going blank on me. For that has a monitor mode chipset. Because the one I use isn't that model, and this model is cheaper. Does anybody know that off the top of your head? If not, I'll find it and add it to the link. But you can't just buy a wireless adapter. Like if I look at this, most of these are not going to be able to enable monitor mode, so you can't do wireless intrusion detection like with Kismet. And actually, if I do this SANS wireless adapter, here we go. This will tell me what it is because it's in this. This is a really cool class, by the way. And there we go. Like this. Look, oh, Raspberry Pi. So I'll put these recommendations in here, but You can actually mimic this and try to grab like this type of card. If you're doing RFID, like Atheros is the chipset I'm using, but it's still not the device I'm trying to recommend. But here we go. Here's the Bluetooth adapter that's probably way cheaper than the Ubertooth. Ta-da! It's this one, by the way, not this one. Still 90 bucks, but the Ubertooth is actually more expensive than that. So I'll reference these, but these are special wireless or USB or PCI cards that let you do Mara mode, because that is proprietary. By the way, if you get a graphics card, like a PCI graphics card, and you're using it with a hypervisor like vSphere, you can pass PCI cards up into a virtual machine, and you can do password cracking and things like that still too. Um, that is above and beyond, and probably even outside the scope of most of the stuff we'll do in the videos. Unless it's some of the data science stuff, then you do need access to a graphics card. Well, you don't have to, but if you want it to be fast, you will. Let's see here. UPS. Yep. I'll show you. So what I'm doing for these tends to be these cyber powers. There's a reason, because that is more expensive. But if you do a, like, say this Amazon Basic UPS, it's going to give you a battery backup, right? You lose power, it's going to beep at you, and hopefully power gets restored within however many minutes you can handle. The reason I pay more for something like the cyber powers is when you do these, if I look at the back here, see that USB port or the serial port or even the networks? That means I can integrate it with the hardware. So let's say there's a power outage. I can have software talking to the UPS, even something like Nagios, and saying, hey, you only have 4 minutes left before I run out of power. Start gracefully shutting down all the virtual machines, and then once that's done, power down your hypervisor. So if you want something that supports clean shutdowns, you're going to have to get a UPS that allows you to talk to it. A lot of the cheaper ones will not. Is it worth, like, is clean shutdowns worth paying? Like here we got 1500, 1000 watt versus what was the $60 one? That is 800 versus, but it's 450 watt. So the other one was actually quite a bit more powerful. The amount of work and effort it goes into to communicating to your UPS over software, most of you probably aren't going to do it anyway. So just FYI. Zachary, I just noticed you donated. I didn't even know that I fully had that set up, but I appreciate that. Thank you for the coffee. Thank you very much. So okay, UPS. We've got 7 minutes left. What else? What am I forgetting? Am I forgetting anything? I think we've covered the core, but what else are we potentially not calling out here? I'll give you guys a second, guys, gals, whoever's out there. I know there's webcams and stuff, but again, short of doing like facial recognition or home smart camera systems. This is software, but if you do the Raspberry Pi, some of the stuff I'll probably do videos on. I don't really consider this cybersecurity lab. It's more of hobby. But I do like my kids' baby monitoring, the house temperatures. I have smart locks and lights, and I do it with Home Assistant. They now do have a new hardware-based unit. I do mine off Raspberry Pi, but I think the folks that built this have done such a good job. I might buy one of these more so to just help support them because they do good work. So this is a really cool thing as well. Unraid, I have not tried. Oh, NAS, yep. And I have not tried Unraid. What is Unraid? Unraid. Unleash your hardware. So what is this? Avium switches. I'll check out this Unraid. I have not seen this, so I'll look into this a little bit more. Yeah, so yeah, Proxmox Light Quick. So real quick, we got NAS. NAS, what you might want to do just because of the cost, is if you stick to Synology, or I really like, as well as QNAP. These two, you can buy them without hard drives, and then just buy used or new, doesn't matter. And then you can do them as iSCSI or NFS. The reason I forgot to talk about NAS is because one of the things I'm going to show you very shortly is with the Proxmark hypervisor, and this will be in the pros and cons of all the different hypervisors. I would say Proxmox is actually my favorite home lab, or even like corporate work lab, unless you need it to mirror your environment, because you don't need a NAS with this. This will let you do a hyper-converged software-based multi-local disk, kind of like a Nutanix, if you're familiar with that. So like I have a 4 terabyte SSD and 3 of those HP Z620s. And when I install Proxmox, and I'll video this, I can enable Ceph as a shared file system across all of them. And it will take all the storage of all of them, and now I can do virtual machines and migrate them from storage to storage because it's a shared storage. Technically, when you buy something like a NAS box like these and you put drives in them, you're doing NFS or iSCSI, and I still would recommend that. But if you're just doing it to play with it, you can also do NAS as software. So I can do like Open NAS, there's Free NAS, there's multiple of these. I'll probably showcase this as well. Everybody should have some experience with NFS and iSCSI. I feel like everybody should. Maybe not fiber. You don't need to buy fiber just to play with fiber. Even though it's fundamentally different, like you don't do like IP addresses, it's still very similar to like iSCSI anyway. I know if you're like, I'm a fiber expert, that Justin, you're completely off your rocker. It's still close enough to iSCSI that if you know how to set up iSCSI, you can probably set up the fiber stuff. Um, but you can do that as a virtual machine without buying a NAS solution. So if you have the money, go for the NAS. The hyper-converged, like with Ceph, might actually be faster. Um, so me personally, I have a NAS and I don't use it because it's much faster for me to just use Proxmark with Ceph. So just throwing that out there. Okay. I'll also show you later how to do some benchmarking to prove what is faster. But once you start deploying virtual machines, you're gonna know. You'll know pretty quickly. KVM switches, those I would probably point you again towards eBay or something where you can get them used, because the nicer ones can get more expensive. Ooh. 1 second, I just lost video. My battery died. There we go. Sorry, you're gonna get the not nice camera now because I was using my Canon DSLR for video. But KVMs, these aren't very expensive. I'll check out Unraid. I'm not familiar with that one. But you can buy cheaper KVMs. I've used like these kind of models I kind of like. You also, for those of you who you're kind of physically dispersed, they do make IP-based KVMs, and they also make keyboard mouse over Ethernet. So like I can be working here, but working on something that's actually at my house. So you can do that as well. So, okay. We've got 2 minutes left. I feel like we've covered quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. But y'all have my contact information. I'll put it back up on the ending screen here in a second. But feel free to message me on Twitter. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you want to track this. And I'll try to get the Twitch stuff going as well. But we're going to be making a lot more of these videos. Some of them will be live. I'm aiming for Fridays for live sessions. But I'm also doing a lot more that will just be recorded and posted on YouTube. So we'll keep going with this series. The videos that are coming next are hypervisors, virtualization, whether it's Fusion, VirtualBox, Workstation, Player, you name it. But let's keep doing this. Thanks everybody for the suggestions. And we'll end here today. So thanks everybody, and we'll keep going.